Thank you, Chairwoman Bass, for holding such an important hearing. The issue of women that are stuck in an unjust criminal justice system is becoming a greater issue in this country, and it's rarely part of the conversation. So I thank you, Ms. Shank, and other women who may be present here today, Ms. Kerman, for lifting up your voices, for your courage in sharing your stories. It's the only way that we are going to bring attention to the issues. So thank you for being here today. The fact is that most women are charged with lower level offenses and have less extensive criminal histories than their male counterparts. In 2017, women of color were particularly impacted by our laws, where 40% of federal women offenders are Hispanic and 21% are Black. Of these women, upwards of 85 to 90% have a history of domestic or sexual abuse, and 60% of the women that are right now in prison have children 18 years or younger. I wanted to start with Ms. McCurdy. In the past 40 years, we've seen that the state prison population of women has grown up to by 834%. And why do you think we've had such a drastic increase of women who are now in the prison system?
Because of the war on drugs is one of the major reasons. And we've, both in the federal and state system, we have focused so much of our attention. For example, in the federal system, 45% of the people that are in Bureau of Prison custody are there for drug offenses. So almost half of the people that are in federal custody are there for drug offenses. Some of them are women, but what you're seeing is the result of the focus on the war on drugs and why so many women and men are in prison, even though many of them really need treatment and don't need incarceration. And our money would be better spent if we really focused on treating their substance abuse, because a lot of it is substance abuse, whether they were charged with trafficking or charged with possession, versus spending on the federal level $36,000 a year per person to incarcerate people. We could spend, I think Piper talked about $20,000 a year for drug treatment, probably even less than that, though.
Yeah, the economic cost is huge, but the human cost is devastating for generations. In 2016, the imprisonment rate of African American women was twice the rate of imprisonment for white women, and Hispanic women were imprisoned 1.4 times more than white women. Ms. McCurdy, why are women of color more likely to be imprisoned at twice the rate than white women? And what solutions do you see in solving this gap?
Well, I think, again, as I've talked about before, I think one is we have to develop alternatives to incarceration. We have to also, in terms of women that are in prison, we have to be very responsive to their health needs, their mental health needs, their physical health needs, their gynecological needs. We also have to train corrections staff, for example, when women end up in prison, to make sure they are being responsive, gender responsive to women's needs. Because, as I think Piper said earlier, the prison systems were built on the fact that mostly men would be in them. And so a lot of the policies reflect that now. And they have not caught up to the fact that we have so many women that are in those prison systems. And so policies have to be responsive to gender needs. And those are some of the major things that we really need to focus on. We talked about shackling on the federal level. That has been addressed to a certain extent, but we haven't talked about solitary confinement. Pregnant women are often held in solitary confinement while they're pregnant and postpartum. We have to ban the policies that allow women that are pregnant to be held in solitary confinement. They're very dangerous.
Thank you, Ms. McCurdy. It's, as a mother, it's been tough to hear your testimony this morning. It's tough enough to see that this administration is following family separation policies, and they're doing the same in the criminal justice system, and it's just heartbreaking. A question for Ms. Kerman. You testified that policy, not crimes, drive incarceration. And I've seen that in other policies that the administration has taken as well. Can you explain a little bit what you mean by that?
Sure. So you're drawing attention to racial disparities in the system is a reflection of policy. So I live in Ohio. You might have two young men committing the exact same offense, but by policy and procedure, one of those young men might be heavily policed if he lives in a poor neighborhood, and one of those young men might not be policed at all if he lives in a fraternity house at OSU. Those disparities, those are policy choices, and those things drive disparity and drive some of those problems. We've talked a lot about substance use disorder and about, its factor in driving incarceration and the availability or lack of treatment. I have to draw our attention back to this policy of mandatory minimum sentencing. If harsh punishment related to drug offenses worked, then we would not be where we are with addiction and drug abuse in this country. Ohio has one of the highest overdose rates in the country. We incarcerate a huge number of low-level drug offenders. It does not result in less addiction and, yes, less substance use. There's a certain point in time, decades in, when we have to say, regardless of what our punitive instincts are, that the policies and approach we have used is not working in terms of the public health and safety concerns which concern us the most. So that's a good example of that policy driving incarceration, even as it fails to solve the problems that we want solved in the community.
Thank you, Ms. Kerman. I think I'm out of time.